In 1700, India was a thriving nation, making up 27% of the global economy. But 250 years later, India's share had dropped to less than 3%, and its people were left in poverty. What happened? Let's go back to 18th century India. The Mughal Empire was in disarray after Emperor Aurangzeb's death in 1707. Weak leaders and regional powers fought for control, making India vulnerable to foreign invasion. The British saw an opportunity and used their advantages to gain a foothold in India. India was no stranger to foreign aggression, but the British were different. They saw India as a gold mine to be forever extracted, unlike previous invaders who either looted and left or assimilated into Indian culture. By the time India gained independence in 1947, its native institutions had been demolished, its economy deindustrialized, its trade networks severed, and its people more deeply divided. The British exploitation was so extreme that American scholar Will Durant called it the greatest crime in history. Let's see what India was like before colonialism. In the 19th century, American J.T. Sunderland wrote about the India the British found. India was a dominant manufacturing nation with famous textile goods, exquisite jewelry, precious stones, fine metalwork, and great architecture. It was a great shipbuilding nation with commerce and trade extending to all civilized countries. India was a textile superpower with many textile centers and a 25% share of the global textile trade. This thriving trade had knock-on effects for the entire economy, creating stable international distribution networks and flourish. The Indian shipbuilding industry was massive, with many ports engaged in ship construction and entire rural communities involved in production and processing. Bengali ships were renowned for their elegance, utility, and fine workmanship, with an average lifespan of over 20 years, compared to English ships which lasted only 12 years. India's manufacturing prowess was unmatched, with great merchants, businessmen, bankers, and financiers. But the British changed all this. They dismantled native industries, imposed harsh taxes, and broke the thumbs of skilled artisans to eliminate competition. They extracted wealth, deindustrialized the nation, and left India impoverished. The deliberate bleeding of India by the British was a dark and messy history that unmade the India that once inspired the world. India was a pioneer in the global steel industry as early as the 6th century CE. Indian blacksmiths, particularly along the Malabar coast and in the Deccan, produced high-quality steel for export. Arab and European officers regularly imported blades from India, not only for warfare but also as a status symbol in times of peace. India was a manufacturing powerhouse, exporting high-quality goods to markets worldwide. But how did the British manage to dismantle India's thriving economy? The British principle was to make India subservient to their interests. Once in power, they changed the Indian economy to suit their needs. First, they dismantled native industries, establishing a legal monopoly over Indian textiles and cutting off the export market. This disrupted long-standing trade links and made British the exclusive buyers of Indian textiles. The British then changed the payment method, using tax revenues extracted from India instead of foreign currency. The Indian economy stagnated, prices collapsed, and skilled artisans became poorer and more restricted. British manufacturers couldn't compete with Indian products, so they lobbied to eliminate the competition. British soldiers smashed Indian looms and even broke the thumbs of weavers to prevent them from working. An 80-year tariff was imposed on Indian textiles, making exports to the UK unviable. Similar restrictions were imposed on nearly every branch of Indian manufacturing. India was reduced to exporting raw materials like cotton and metal ore, while the British sold finished products back to Indians at a premium. By 1947, only 0.7% of India was employed in manufacturing. Skilled workers were forced into agriculture, leading to rural wages plummeting and catastrophic famines. The British taxed cultivators at 50–80% of their gross income, calculated before the harvest. Indian cultivators often owed more in taxes than they earned. The British knew this was harsh and bragged about it in Parliament. Colonial taxes were so burdensome that 2/3 of the population fled to areas ruled by native Indian lords. Those who stayed behind were subjected to physical torture, land confiscation, and forced labor. By the end of the 19th century, India was Britain's largest source of revenue, purchaser of exports, and provider of highly paid employment for British officials and soldiers, all paid for by Indian taxes. Many British officials acknowledged the exploitative nature of colonialism, with a British Prime Minister admitting that India was being bled of its wealth. And so India and its people were drained of their resources and left impoverished. The British rule in India was fundamentally flawed because the British never intended to become a part of the land or rule it as their own. They saw India as forever foreign, justifying their exploitation and extraction of resources, unlike the Turks who invaded India and eventually formed the Delhi Sultanate and Mughal Empire. The British didn't make India their new home. They extracted resources and repatriated them to Britain. Unlike the Mughals who preserved the British ruled India as disconnected tyrants, extracting revenue without reinvesting it in the country. Modern economists estimate that the British extracted a staggering $43 trillion from India, a loss that constitutes an absolute extinction of wealth. Apologists for colonial rule often point to the railways as a counter-argument, but modern scholars argue that the railways serve as evidence of exploitative and inefficient British investment. Initially, the Indian railways were a grand investment scheme for British shareholders, with the government guaranteeing substantial returns. When revenues were not enough, Indian taxpayers covered the losses. Construction was extremely inefficient, with every mile of Indian rail costing £18,000 to construct, compared to £2,000 in the United States. The essential purpose of the railways was to assist the British in exploiting India's natural resources, leading to the export of enormous amounts of grain and agricultural products, sparking exacerbated famines. Over the course of British rule, an estimated 35 million preventable deaths were caused by famines, more than those killed under Stalin or Mayo, and 5 times more than the Holocaust. The British were directly responsible, exporting Indian foodstuffs to Britain and other countries even during drought periods. Food became too expensive for peasants to afford, and the British had no interest in provisioning for Indian lives. Famine non-intervention was official government policy, and when good people tried to help, the British government made efforts to stop them. Independent India has its flaws, but it has been overwhelmingly better at providing for the care, safety and prosperity of its people. There hasn't been a single large-scale Indian famine in the 70-plus years since British rule ended, a testament to India's ability to govern itself and prioritize its people's well-being. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please like, share and subscribe.